of a Christian. In fact, the Bible is filled with persecution. In the book of Acts, we see that the first church dealt with a severe persecution. What does it mean to be persecuted? Well, it means to be pressed, to be imprisoned, troubles, trials, tribulation. Let's keep reading. We're in Philippians chapter 1. Verse 19. For I know that this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayer and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, according to my earnest expectation and hope that in nothing shall I be ashamed, but with all boldness, as always, so now also Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. As I was meditating on God, and as I was in prayer today for tonight's service, I was online. Every now and then I go and I search for stories of people in other parts of the world who are suffering for Christ. Every now and then I go on, to see the persecutions that Christians are going through, so that I can remember what real Christianity is. Because it's easy to forget here. That is what Christianity looks like around the world. Let me give you a better picture. I'm going to tell you 3 brief testimonies that I read about that impacted me to the point of tears. And so I want to share this with you, because I was blessed. So I just pass on this blessing. One was of a man named Yun in China. They were preaching in a land where there was mountains, and on this website they didn't say specifically where, because they didn't want to draw more persecution. But his name was Yun. And they were preaching. He was preaching in a land, on a mountain that had so much snow that they could hear the branches snapping off of trees because of the weight of the snow. These were not a rich people, they were a poor people. And they gathered in what they called the meeting place to pray and seek God. And they would do it in the middle of the night, because if they were caught in China, there's still a very severe persecution. This was not too long ago. And as Yun was preaching a powerful word of God, they sang a worship song. I wish I would have printed it out, because the whole worship song was about dying for Christ. I've never seen anything like it. The chorus said, "It is a joy to die for my God." Never seen anything like it. And then one of the members stood up and prophesied and said, some of us within 3 days will be in persecution. Will be in tribulation. That very night, as they broke out of service, a group of men came toward Yun and a few people that were around him. And they shouted, "What are you doing?" And immediately they sensed something was wrong and started to run, but they captured Yun. They had stun rods, and they stunned him, and he couldn't move, and they took him, and they began to beat him violently right in the streets. And they picked him up and said, "Lead us to the other people that were in this meeting of yours." And so he wouldn't do it. He tried to feign madness like David before Saul, and he began to shout, "I am a heavenly man." They asked, "Who are you?" "I am a heavenly man. This is not my home." And they took him to the nearest village, because that's where they assumed the people were at. And he was shouting at the top of his lungs, "I am being persecuted for my God. I am a heavenly man. I am a heavenly man." Warning those who were around him that there were soldiers in the area. And they threw him on the ground again, and they began to beat him before all the people. And some of them saw and they wept, because they saw their leader being beat, being persecuted. Then they took him and a few others to prison. In the prison, they beat him some more. One of the others, they cracked under the weight, under the pressure of persecution. And the one man said, "I am an earthly man, I'm not a heavenly man." And then the guard said, "Since you're an earthly man, we're going to put you in with a heavenly man." And when he came in, Yun shouted at the top of his lungs, "You do not deny God. You do not deny the Christ. You say no to Satan." And he began to write on the wall with his finger, "No, no, no," to the point that blood, "no" was written in blood on the wall 3 times. There was another time where they kept on offering him. They said, "If you just deny this God, we'll let you go, we'll release you." He wouldn't do it. He said, "I am a heavenly man." They beat him some more. There was a day where they went to feed them food. They give them their portion. And Yun bent down before all the men and began to pray. And one of the other prison mates grabbed his food and hid it. And a guard saw that his food was missing while he was praying. He said, "Who stole the food?" Nobody confessed. So they searched everyone and they found the guy who did it. They told every other guard inside that prison, beat him to death. And all the vile men that were there, they beat him, they drowned him in urine. And Yun was so disturbed by the fact that this man that he forgave died, that he began to weep and cry out to God before all of them. And then every night he began to cry out to God and cry out to God and cry out to God. There was one day where they took him outside, and with a stun rod they said, "Oh, you are a heavenly man? Touch the stun rod." They made him touch the stun rod. And as he touched it, he cried out to God and he cried out to God, and you know what happened? The stun rod stopped working. And the guard began to tremble and dropped it and ran. They would bring him food, and the guards would make sure that nothing that they brought would come to him. He suffered. At the end of the article, he was still in prison. There was another man in India, an Indian Baptist minister by the name of Paul. He was preaching the word of God. Many were being saved. Indian authorities came into his church on a Sunday, and in front of his entire congregation, they began to beat him violently. And they said, "Don't preach here anymore. Next time we come to kill you." The next week, he went to the hospital. That very day, the next week, he was up preaching again. They came in, they beat him again. They said, "We warn you, do not preach in this name anymore." He went back to the hospital, he came back out, and he was preaching again. But it gets worse. They came back, and as he was preaching, they grabbed his daughter, and they said to him, "If you continue to preach in this name, we will burn her alive." And she shouted, "Preach, preach, preach! Dad, don't stop preaching the word." They poured gasoline on her, and he preached. With tears in his eyes, with passion, he preached. And then they lit her on fire, and she shouted, "Preach, preach!" And she died right in front of her father, and he preached. And then they took him, and they beat him. They beat him so bad, his abdomens were coming out. They thought they killed him. He went back to the hospital. They rescued him. They saved him. The next week, he was preaching again. And I began to weep before God. And I began to say, "Lord, what kind of Christianity do we have in this country?" But we're afraid of what people will think. And this man preached, even watching his daughter burn alive for the Christ. We need to wake up. Christianity is not a call to live the most glamorous life that we can live. The most blessed life we can live. Anytime you get a blessing, it's not just for you, it's for others. And this country has become consumed with blessing, and they don't share it with the world that is dying. The churches, they build their walls, they build their churches, they build, and then they beg for more. But how much of that is going to places that need? I'd rather stay a small church and send all the money out. I have nothing against churches that grow. That's not what I'm saying. But we've lost our focus. Not necessarily this church, but this country. Christianity is not a call to live